Al-Ma'idah, from the beginning of this chapter up until verse 81. So, with respect to Surah An-Nisa, there are three underlying themes that are discussed within the remainder of this chapter. The first is the alleged crucifixion of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. Allah Azza wa Jal makes mention of some of the allegations that Jews and Christians made, where they made the claim that Isa alayhi salam was crucified and was killed. And the Qur'an categorically makes a rebuttal of these baseless claims. And Allah Azza wa Jal explicitly mentions that they claim that he was crucified and killed, rather we raised him to the heavens and he will return to the end of time. After this, Allah swiftly moves on to speaking about the manipulation of the people of the book of the biblical scripture. So Allah instructs the people of the book to avoid manipulating the biblical scripture. And within this is a lesson for us to treat the Qur'an with reverence and respect through adhering to its principles, its laws and its injunctions. The next theme of the remainder of Surah An-Nisa is inheritance. So we discussed in the previous session that Surah An-Nisa is a Madinan chapter. So when we speak about the context of Quranic verses and chapters, they're often categorized into two. One is Meccan verses and chapters, and the other is Madinan verses and chapters. Meccan verses and chapters are generally themed around etiquettes, mannerisms, monotheism, hellfire, paradise. Whereas Madinan chapters and verses tend to be themed around laws, injunctions, policies, and governance. So we can often determine the context of a chapter or a verse through looking at the meanings. So Surah An-Nisa is a Madinan chapter, and this was revealed shortly after the unexpected loss that Muslims faced during the Battle of Uhud. And this loss gave birth to many unprecedented social problems in Medina for the Muslims. Among those problems was the loss of life. Children were rendered orphans and women were rendered widows. And this placed people in a position where they had never-ending questions and queries. Among those questions and queries that they had was relating to inheritance. So Allah, towards the end of Surah An-Nisa, He makes mention of an aspect of the rulings of inheritance. And He says that a man who dies without having a child and leaves behind a sister, she will be entitled to half of his inheritance. And if he leaves behind two sisters, they are both entitled to 2/3 of his inheritance. And this is a portion of the rulings of inheritance that are mentioned towards the end of Surah An-Nisa. Then Surah Al-Ma'idah begins. And Surah Al-Ma'idah is loosely translated to mean the spread. And this name or this title was drawn from a story that's made mention of within this surah. And that's the story of the disciples of Isa alayhi salam, where they requested a food spread from Allah Himself. And for this reason, then this name was ascribed to this surah. What distinguishes this surah from many other surahs is the fact that 18 laws and injunctions were made mention of within this chapter. And some of the scholars of Qur'an make mention of some of the reasons why 18 rules and laws were made mention of within this surah alone. And the reason is because the Muslims had undergone significant economical progression post the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which occurred in the year 6 after Hijrah. So post the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Muslims had made connections, contracts, agreements, and treaties with people of the book alongside other nomadic tribes. So given this undeniable reality, laws, policies, guidelines, and governance was something that Muslims were in a pressing need of. Hence, verses were revealed, giving them a sense of direction, allowing them to govern their day-to-day interpersonal dealings and interactions. The first thing that's made mention of within this surah is unlawful and lawful foods. Allah Azza wa Jal explicitly makes mention of the types of foods that are lawful for Muslims and the types of foods that are unlawful for Muslims, indicating to us that not everything we consume is halal, and that we have to be careful when it comes to consummation. We have to ensure what we're consuming is that which the Quranic discourse and the prophetic discourse has explicitly rendered halal. And we know that the ruling in fiqh, generally speaking, is that everything is lawful unless there's an explicit verse suggesting its unlawfulness. This is the general ruling when it comes to permissible things. The next thing that's made mention of are wudu and ghusl related rulings and guidelines. The verses wherein instructions were given with respect to wudu and ghusl and the procedure of how these acts are carried out, these were revealed within Surah Al-Ma'idah. Another theme within this chapter is Allah Azza wa Jal instructs the Muslims to embody guidance in all its forms. And the actual verse that's stated in Al-Ma'idah is, do not be unjust because of the injustice of others. Meaning, continue to display justice upon the earth, even if you become a victim of injustice yourself. Teaching us that justice and uprightness and honesty is something Muslims should embody, and these are behaviors we should aspire to possess. And towards the end of Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah Azza wa Jal, He refutes the concept of Trinity in its entirety. So Allah tells the people, do not use the word three when speaking about your Lord. Rather, use the word one. Islam is all in all a monotheistic faith. And we believe in the worship of one God. And association of partnership with Him is seen among the gravest of sins within our religion and our theology. And this is what the Surah Al-Ma'idah towards verse 81 is concluded with. Just want to make mention of three benefits that we can take away, just to personalize the whole session. The first benefit is the importance of justice. We're all in positions of authority and influence. If we're not business owners, we're fathers. If we're not fathers, we're siblings. If we're not siblings, then we're friends. We all have authority and influence in our life in some way or form. And whenever we're in a position of this sort, it's crucial that we maintain the highest form of justice and uprightness. And that's what Islam instructs us to do. And when we look at what's happening now in Gaza, where there are hundreds of children who are being deprived of basic health care, where there are tons of women who are losing their children with each moment that passes, it's even more important for us to uphold justice through speaking out against this oppression and genocide, and not fearing the blame of the blamers. The second benefit we learn is adherence to Islamic policies and laws. The themes that are mentioned within just 6, one of the themes was the manipulation of the people of the book of their biblical scripture. And Allah is cautioning us from following in their footsteps. When a Quranic verse has a full stop, we shouldn't place a question mark. If Allah instructs us to do a certain thing, it should be fulfilled. And this is in relation to things that are unequivocal and clear. When it comes to the selling of alcohol, the consumption of alcohol, the consumption of riba, these are things that are crystal clear and are unequivocal. And Muslims should ensure that they abstain from these things to gain Allah's pleasure, to ensure everything within their lives, within their interactions is halal. And last but not least, is it teaches us an important lesson with respect to the Quranic discourse. Culturally speaking, from a young age, we view the Quran as a book that's read for mere reward. But when we look at the finer details of chapters like Al-Ma'idah, we realize that 18 laws, injunctions and penalties are made mention of within this chapter, teaching us that Quran is much more than just a book full of stories. Rather, it's a book that's a code of conduct, a way of life, a yardstick, a criterion used to measure right and wrong for the people. And this was the very book that governed Islamic civilizations for decades. So it teaches us to revisit our relationship with this book and to refine the way we look at this book, to change the way we interact with this book. It's a book not just full of stories, but full of practical lessons and advice that we can incorporate in our lives to make our lives more spiritual, more fulfilling and more satisfying. We ask Allah Jalla Jalaluhu to make us of the people of Qur'an, allow us to connect to the book in the month of the Qur'an. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأتوب إليه.